He left the captain at the tank and hobbled with the rifle up the arroyo and gathered dead floodwash brush and hobbled back and made a fire at the upper end of the basin. He fanned the blaze with his hat and piled on more wood. The horses in the firelight, reflected off the water, were rimed with drying sweat and shifted pale and ghostly and blinked their red eyes. He looked at the captain. The captain was lying on his side on the smooth rock incline of the basin like something that had not quite made it to the water. He limped around to the horses and got out the rope and sat with his knife and cut hobbles from it for all the horses and looped them about their forefeet. Then he levered all the shells out of the rifle and put them in his pocket and took one of the water bottles and went back to the fire. He fanned the fire, and he took the pistol out of his belt and pulled the cylinder pin and put the loaded cylinder and the pin in his pocket along with the rifle shells. Then he took out his knife and with the point of it unscrewed the screw from the grips and put the grips and the screw into his other pocket. He fanned the coals in the heart of the fire with his hat, and with a stick he raked them into a pile, and then he bent and stuck the barrel of the pistol into the coals. The captain had sat up to look at him. "They will find you," he said, "in this place. We ain't staying in this place. I can't ride no more. You'll be surprised at what you can do." He took off his shirt and soaked it in the Tinaja and came back to the fire, and he fanned the fire again with his hat. And then he pulled off his boots and unbuckled his belt and let down his trousers. The rifle bullet had entered his thigh, high up on the outside, and the exit wound was in a rotation at the rear, such that by turning his leg he could see both wounds clearly. He took up the wet shirt and very carefully wiped away the blood until the wounds were clear and stark as two holes in a mask. The area around the wounds was discolored and looked blue in the firelight, and the skin around that was yellow. He leaned and ran a stick through the grip frames of the pistol and swung it up and away from the fire into his shadow and looked at it and then put it back. The captain was sitting, holding his arm in his lap and watching him. "It's fixin' to get kindly noisy in here," he said. "Watch out you don't get run over by a horse." The captain didn't answer. He watched him while he fanned the fire. When next he dragged the pistol from the coals, the end of the barrel glowed a dull red, and he laid it on the rocks and picked it up quickly by the grips in the wet shirt and jammed the red-hot barrel, ash and all, down into the hole in his leg. The captain either did not know what he was going to do, or knowing did not believe. He tried to rise to his feet and fell backwards and almost slid into the Tinaja. John Grady had begun to shout even before the gunmetal hissed in the meat. His shout clapped shut the calls of lesser creatures everywhere about them in the night, and the horses all stood swimming up into the darkness beyond the fire and squatting in terror on their great thighs, screaming and pawing the stars. And he drew breath and howled again and jammed the gun barrel into the second wound and held it the longer in deference to the cooling of the metal. And then he fell over on his side and dropped the revolver on the rocks, where it clattered and turned and slid down the basin and vanished hissing into the pool. He'd seized the fleshy part of his thumb in his teeth, shaking in agony. With the other hand, he reached for the water bottle standing unstoppered on the rocks and poured water over his leg and heard the flesh hiss like something on a spit. And he gasped and let the bottle fall. And he raised up and called out his horse's name to him softly, where he scrabbled and fell on the rocks in his hobbles among the others, that he might ease the fright in the horse's heart. When he turned and reached for the water bottle where it lay draining on the rocks, the captain kicked it away with his boot. He looked up. He was standing over him with the rifle. He held it with the stock under his armpit, and he gestured upward with it. "Get up," he said. He pushed himself up on the rocks and looked across the tank toward the horses. He could only see two of them, and he thought the third one must have run out down the arroyo, and he couldn't tell which one was missing, but guessed it was the Blevins horse. He got hold of his belt and managed to get his breeches back on. "Where is the keys?" said the captain. He pushed himself up and rose and turned and took the rifle away from the captain. The hammer dropped with a dull metallic snap. "Get back over there and sit down," he said. The captain hesitated. The man's dark eyes were turned toward the fire, and he could see the calculation in them, and he was in such a rage of pain he thought he might have killed him had the gun been loaded. He grabbed the chain between the handcuffs and yanked the man past him, and the captain gave out a low cry and went tottering off, bent over and holding his arm. He got the shells out and sat and reloaded the rifle. He reloaded it one shell at a time, sweating and wheezing and trying to concentrate. He hadn't known how stupid pain could make you, and he thought it should be the other way around, or what was the good of it? When he got the rifle loaded, he picked up the wet rag of shirt and used it to carry a brand from the fire down to the edge of the tank, where he stood holding it out over the water. The water was dead clear in the stone pool, and he could see the pistol, and he weighed it out and bent and picked it up and stuck it in his belt. He walked out in the tank till the water was to his thigh, which was as deep as it got, and he stood there, soaking the blood out of his trousers and the fire out of his wounds, and talking to his horse. The horse limped down to the edge of the water and stood, and he stood in the dark Tinaja with the rifle over his shoulder, holding the brand above him until it burned out, and then he stood holding the crooked orange ember of it, still talking to the horse.